everybody, so we can keep it for posterity. And I'm going to start sharing my screen, so make sure everybody can see the presentation. Thumbs up if you can see the presentation. Excellent. So I'm going to turn it over to Gary and take it away, my friend.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob. Glad to be here tonight. So Rob, I guess you're going to turn the slides for me as I ask, and I think we're going to ask folks if they got any questions to put them in the chat box.
That's correct.
Okay, and we'll stop throughout and try to answer them for you. So maybe next slide to start with. So my objective tonight is to do a little bit of introduction, talk about the Darlington refurbishment project, my favorite project. Then I want to get into a little bit about what we did to plan for a mega project. So some of the things that we did to get ready for Darlington refurbishment, which I believe will be applicable to any large mega project. I know there's lots of nuclear folks on here, but I know there's some non-nuclears folks on here too. But I'm hopefully that the things I'll talk about will be applicable to your industry as well. I'm not planning to get into a technical discussion of the technical details of how to install a calandria tube or how to deal with weld failures on feeders. I could talk about those things, but probably not the best use of all of our time. I'm going to focus in on project controls, project management. In the lessons learned that I'll talk about at the end here, I'll probably get into a little bit of the technical details, but from a practical, implementable viewpoint. So, and if I get too technical, Rob, you just interrupt me and tell me to get back on course, right? So
you got it, sir.
Okay, so that's the plan for tonight. Hopefully get through the presentation in 60 or so minutes and give you guys some time to answer questions or talk about anything else that's on your mind while we're here. Next slide, please. So I am not going to talk much about myself. The only thing I'll say here is that I've been with OPG for 32 years. I grew up in corporate finance. I am a CPA. How did I end up in projects? Something called Y2K, where we had to convert all of our IT systems to be year 2000 compliant for the young folks in the room. That was my first foray into projects. I ended up at Pickering on the Pickering A Return to Service project and started to get involved in earned value management and things of that, like being a finance person. It was really a sweet spot for me. AACE was something that I connected to back then. I've been involved with AACE, been a member for about probably close to 15 years now, based on that experience. But being an accountant and leading costs, this was really something that I embraced very early. I then left the RTS and went on to a cost and schedule improvement project where we still execute hundreds of millions of dollars of portfolio projects every year. So the goal there was to embrace PMI methods, AACE methods, and make our project outcomes even better. I then moved over to Darlington Refurbishment Project in 2007, originally in the planning role. I took the project right through to the start of Unit 2. About a third of the way through Unit 2, I moved from planning, being the vice president of project planning and controls, to execution, which was enlightening, but it's nice to have seen both sides of it. And I will talk about some of that in my lessons learned. Now I am focused on, I'm helping Unit 3 as they get rolling, but I'm focused on right now Unit 1 and 4 planning. Next slide, please. So first, thought I would introduce OPG. I think probably most of you know who OPG is. OPG is one of the most diverse electricity generators in North America. We mostly use nuclear and hydropower to make electricity, but we also use biomass, gas, and solar. In 2014, we stopped burning coal to produce electricity, and this still represents one of North America's largest climate change action to date. Today, we're one of the largest low-cost generator in Ontario. We share that with our friends at Bruce Power. We produce about half of the electricity in Ontario that we rely on each and every day. Next slide, please. Something you may not be aware of, in addition to the hydroelectric and nuclear stations that we have in Ontario, we also have a number of US hydroelectric stations as well as we just recently bought into and purchased Atura, so we have 4 gas-fired as well. So we are expanding beyond Ontario. Next slide. So nuclear produces 61% of the annual energy supply here in Ontario. So that's 61% between Bruce Power and OPG. So it represents a significant amount of energy that's consumed here in Ontario. So, you know, nuclear contributing to clean air, good economic energy. It's important for us to sustain that 61%. And that's why both of us are going through, nuclear refurbishments, keeping the nuclear renaissance live. And if you follow the news, OPG announced it's looking at building an SMR at the Darlington site. Just on Friday, we announced that. So over the next decade, if all goes well, we'll expect to have a small modular reactor installed in the Darlington site. Just industry news, I heard today that Biden, I guess this is the supposed new president of the United States, has put a statement out today about nuclear power and its importance role in clean air and clean energy in the United States. So that's good to see that nuclear is getting that kind of support. Next slide. Oh, my friend Roy Martin just is entering the room. I recognize a few of these names. Roy and I work together here at OPG. So hello, Roy. So that's a little bit about myself and OPG. Let me jump right into the refurbishment project itself. So next slide. So Darlington has been in operations for close to 30 years now and represents about 20% of the province's electricity. It's recognized internationally, i.e. by groups like WANO, for its excellent performance. As Darlington Unit 1 now holds the world record for the longest continuous operation of a nuclear unit at over 1,000 days now and counting. We have a planned outage for Unit 1 in the first quarter of 2021, so it's likely to get 1,100 plus days or close to 1,100 days by the time we get to that planned outage. All goes well. Darlington is what we refer to as the 3rd generation of CANDU in Ontario, with Pickering, then Bruce, and then Darlington. Its design made it a very good candidate for refurbishment. OPG decided not to refurbish and extend the life of Pickering, but we did decide to extend the life of Darlington, mainly due to its size. They're bigger reactors and they're less complex than the earlier Pickering design, so a lot easier for us to refurbish. As we say in nuclear, we do not have the right to operate, but it's a privilege to operate in the communities for which we operate. So we have great community support and great support provincially to allow us and give us the right to refurbish these 4 units in Darlington with a goal of operating them for 30 plus more years post refurbishment. Next slide, Rob. So as is the case with CANDU reactors, they have a life-limiting component being pressure tubes that requires replacement at the midpoint of the station's operations. The timing for Darlington is now. As such, we started planning for the refurbishment in 2007. And in this presentation, I'm going to talk about some of the things that we did in getting ready for the execution phase of the refurbishment, which we started in 2016 with Unit 2. It is a big mega project to replace all the major reactor components, as well as some of the balance of plant components. We also made some substantial safety investments in the work that we've done so far. So it is a big $12.8 billion investment, but again, it's going to offer 30 years of low cost carbon-free energy for the ratepayers of Ontario, for the citizens of Ontario for 30 more years. Next slide. So the schedule, this is our overall schedule for the refurbishment of the 4 units. And a couple things to note here. We started with Unit 2 in October 2016, and we finished Unit 2 on June 4th, 2020. We were then scheduled to, we were actually scheduled to start Unit 3 at about April timeframe, but with Unit 2 going a little bit longer and we were in the midst of the COVID situation, we deferred the start of Unit 3 and subsequently Unit 1 and 4 by 4 months, and we started Unit 3 in September 2020. Unit 2, as I said, Unit 2 is now complete, and as you'll see, Unit 2 is was executed on its own, where the remaining 3 units are executed with a substantial overlap, about a midway overlap with each unit. And that was really planned to de-risk Unit 2. We wanted to make sure that we were focused on one unit, focused on getting that unit right, taking the lessons learned, and then porting those lessons learned forward for Unit 3, 1, and 4. With being through it once, we felt that we'd have a better chance of success in overlapping the subsequent units than having Unit 2 and Unit 3 going on at the same time. So that was a purposeful decision that we had made in our planning focus to de-risk Unit 2, complete it in its entirety, and apply the lessons learned forward. And you're going to hear some of that, those lessons learned as we go through the conversation. Next slide. So as I've already said, Unit 2 commenced its refurbishment in October 2015, and we completed that on June 4th, 2020. We demonstrated that a project like this can be completed safely, on time and on budget, and we placed 58 systems back into service. We expended over 24 million hours, and we had one unfortunate safety event where an individual tripped and fell on a piece of plywood in the turbine hall and ended up with a broken leg. An unfortunate event that we always strive in the nuclear business for 0 injuries. So we are quite happy with our performance, but we're not content with the performance that we had. One injury is one injury too many, as far as I'm concerned. Unit 2 now has been operating for 168 days quite well. I watch I've got a habit of checking the grid watch every day to see how Unit 2 is doing and making sure it's getting its megawatts out to the grid, and it's doing quite well. And that's a testament to the quality of work that ultimately got done on Unit 2. And I'll talk about this in the lessons learned, that throughout the process, there are quality events. And the good news is that our quality program catches those events and gives us the opportunity to fix those before we finally do the commissioning and the returning of the service of these units. And to be going 168 days now, all out after returning to service is quite impressive. Next slide. So I got a little bit of personal pride in Unit 2, spending so many years planning and then working with Mike Allen executing Unit 2. And I refer to this slide as the thing of beauty. When you look at the unit after it was refurbished and look at all the components, the shininess of all the components in a nuclear plant, it's just a symbol that makes us proud of all the work that we've done. The many times that I was in the unit during the refurbishment, it looked nothing like this, with scaffolding and materials and everywhere. But when it's all said and done, it's like I said, quite a thing of beauty in my opinion. And, maybe this accountant come techie, it's a little bit of a odd thing to say, but it is what it is. It is what it is. Next slide. So we've now shifted into Unit 3, with Unit 2 being complete. We started Unit 3 in September 3rd, 2020. As of mid today, we've defueled 455 of the 480 channels, and we're on track for completion by November 25th, which will put us about 7 days ahead of our working schedule. Now, Unit 3 is forecast to take, as you would have seen on the earlier slides, 3 years, so it's a 36-month schedule. So if all goes to plan against our working schedule, we will be done Unit 3 in September 2023. And again, as I showed in the earlier slide, Unit 1 overlaps Unit 3 by about a 50% mark. So we will be starting Unit 1 in February of 2022. Next slide. I'm not going to spend much time on this slide, but just to note that our refurbishments, whether it's Darlington or Bruce, are great for the Ontario economy as well as the environment as a whole, right? So our project is over 95% of our spend is right here in Ontario, so it's great for the Ontario economy as we refurbish these units, but also due to the fact that nuclear will moderate the total cost of energy, it's great for the economy for 30 more years as well. Next slide, please, Rob. And to that point about its value to Ontario, you know, it's not just Clarington that benefits or Kincardine that benefits. It's the suppliers that are all over Ontario and their local communities, and the people working in those local communities that are benefiting from the acceleration of nuclear renaissance in Canada that both Bruce Power and OPG are embarking upon. Next slide. We can't do this alone. These projects are all about people working together from many companies and trade groups, all buying into the safety practices that we prescribe to and the goals that we are achieving. If it weren't for the trades, we wouldn't have the project. I'm an accountant originally, as I've said, that moved into project controls. My respect for the trades is immensely high. I love the opportunities that I get to work with them and, quite frankly, learn a lot from the discussions that I have with them. I believe that we've done a pretty good job through Unit 2 of empowering our trades to help us get better. I was in the field on Monday and talking to one of the general foremans, and he was just, you know, telling me full of energy all of the things that the lessons learned that they're applying to the feeder program on Unit 3, as if you know, it was his project to run, which is exactly what you want. You want your folks to be empowered in that. So, you know, we're very optimistic that the lessons learned that we took from Unit 2, the focus that our partners have on our success are going to go a long way to make Unit 3 better, and subsequently Unit 1 and 2 even better. So next slide there, please, Rob. So I'll stop there for a moment. I don't know if there are any questions, Rob, but that was just my introduction of OPG, as well as a little bit about the project. I'm going to shift in a minute to get into some of the things we did in planning a mega project.
There's nothing on the chat, but is there, open it up, is there any questions for Gary in the first part? You're all shy.
Yeah, like me, I'm very shy as well. So
yeah. Okay, carry on, Gary.
Okay, very good. So next slide. I need to thank my friend Tracy Leung for the next two slides. Tracy did a presentation at AACE in Toronto a couple weeks ago on change management from the DRP. So Rob, I'm not sure if you have access to that information, but it might be good for you guys to share as well. Good presentation that Tracy did on change control throughout the project. So we live in a fishbowl. We have one shareholder, the Ontario government, which really means we are an extension of the government, and we are accountable and responsible for the taxpayers' money. And with that comes a lot of interest and oversight in how we are doing. We have interest and oversight from the public as a whole, media interest, freedom of information requests. We have the Ministry of Energy, who's assigned an individual to do oversight of our project. We've had a board of directors that also appoints a team to do oversight. We call it a Refurbishment Construction Review Board that we now have on site. Our rates are set by the Ontario Energy Board. So I've been in front of the Ontario Energy Board with the DRP 4 times now, going through excruciating levels of detail, convincing them that we've done a very good job of planning this job. In the past hearing and the next session, we'll be talking about how we took that plan and how effective we executed that. So bottom line is there are a lot of folks looking in and watching how we are doing. And if you go to the next slide, Rob. And it comes from an understanding or reality that mega projects, quite frankly, haven't done that great in historically. Many people, I believe, expected us to fail. Our history of nuclear mega projects are an indicator of that they've been fraught with schedule delays and overruns from across the world and even in close to home here in Ontario, within OPG and elsewhere. And it's not just nuclear; it's other mega projects, oil and gas, civil projects, etc. The larger they get, the more complicated they are, and the more issues that can arise, and the likelihood of failure, quite simply, increases. Can you go to the next slide, please? So we, quite frankly, with this context in mind, we chose to be different. We planned to be different. We understood the context of mega project failures very early on, and we approached the planning phase of this project with that context and with a goal to be successful. So a couple of things that we did, and I'll just talk about them here, and I'll talk about some of it in the detail over the next few slides. After lots of reviews, lessons learned from Bruce Power, Point Lepreau, Wolsong, and other large mega projects, London Airport, the Los Angeles Olympics, go on and on. We looked for every mega project we could find, and we studied them all, and we brought forward a number of key lessons that we were going to, things that we were going to do differently to be successful. So we chose to be the project manager for the Darlington refurbishment project. We are the owner. Ultimately, the buck stops with us. There's no shirking that accountability. We own the success. We own the failure of the DRP. The project is being managed in phases, and you'll see a little bit more about that in the next few slides. We have a multi-prime contracting strategy that is being utilized, but what's key to that is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all contracting strategy. There's a various different contract strategies that are used to effectively execute a mega project. The lessons learned from previous refurbishments and other projects have been incorporated. Independent oversight, we welcomed independent oversight. As I said, we feel like we're in a fishbowl at times, but quite frankly, having some fresh set of eyes coming in, you'll see the forest for the trees, so to speak. We've got lots of great insight, and we've been very open to it, and probably 95% or more of the recommendations that our independent oversight have given us, we've taken on hook, line, and sinker and built it into our plans. And we wanted to make sure that scope, costs, and schedules are developed to a level of detail not seen in prior projects. Quite frankly, you cannot commit to a project without doing planning, right? My statement I always use is plan, 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 or plan to fail. It's simple as that. We need to spend the time in planning, and we did that. Next slide. So we broke our planning into discrete phases and spent close to 10 years doing planning before we locked in on our $12.8 billion release quality estimate, which you'll hear me talk about, call it RQE throughout the presentation. But like I said, we spent from 2006, we were told to start the project. We really got going in 2007. In 2015, we took to our board of directors a release quality estimate. And by that point in time, we had done a huge amount of work. We had done all the feasibility, technical feasibility assessments. We did the environmental assessment. We did the safety review, the integrated safety review. We did all the regulatory requirements, including the integrated implementation plan, a requirement by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. We spent a lot of time and a lot of detail making sure we had an understanding of what the scope is and making sure that it was the right scope. And then we went through the exercise of, once we knew what the scope was, assigning the contracts to execute that scope, developing the detailed estimates and schedule, putting it all together, and presenting it to our board as the RQE, which ultimately becomes the approval document that is the estimate that we will live with forever and a day, $12.8 million. Next slide. So early on in 2009, I developed this roadmap that we used to communicate to our stakeholders how the refurbishment would be executed. And this is probably my number one planning lesson learned. Establish a plan. In our case, the green bubbles were milestones indicating when we would go to our board and ask for funds, right? So we broke down that what we thought at that time was as high as $14 billion. We eventually got it down to $12.8 billion through the planning that we did. But each time we went to our board, we were expected to tell them what we did with the money that they gave us the last time that we were there, and to tell them what we were going to do with the money that we were asking for that day. And then also tell them what our current expectation of the total cost and schedule was for the entire project, right? And why I say this is most important is, you know, really it's your interface with the board who funds these projects, and if you can convey to them a plan and a structured plan that they can assess at points in time, you gain confidence with them, and it gives you the opportunity to spend the time planning and the opportunity to avoid surprises and keep going as things unfolded here. Next slide, please. So what's important to understand here is that, and you've probably heard me talk about the DRP, Design Refurbishment Project, and we do call this whole thing a project. But when you actually get down to the mechanics, the PMI mechanics of how we plan this project, we actually leverage PMI's program methodology. So the program body of knowledge, or what I call the program standard with PMI. We broke down our project. We created a program breakdown structure that allowed us to decompose the work into 511 projects, which we then linked to 4 units and 6 project bundles, which obviously rolled up to our entire plan. And why this was important, it just allowed us to understand that program work breakdown structure allowed us to link all of our individual projects to the contract, to the project bundles, the contracting strategies, etc., and ultimately to the work breakdown structure that each project had to manage the cost of each project. So each project was managed at the project level by a project manager, following a gated process, structured using a common project level work breakdown structure. If you go to the next slide, I'll bring this all together because it might be a bit confusing. So this slide shows a snapshot at the high level of our program work breakdown structure, the top half of the screen, and then the project work breakdown structure at the bottom half of the screen. So the top here, if I was to show you the entire picture, there would be 511 projects mapped to units, mapped to bundles of work such as the retube job or the feeder, the turbine generator job or the balance of plant job. But then within each of those 511 projects, there was a common, look at the bottom half here, a common project work breakdown structure that set the rules for how each project was costed. And we refer to something called Pepsi elements. And Pepsi elements are really just the first level of the program breakdown structure, project management, inspections, engineering, procurement, construction, commissioning, closeout, contingency, and interest, which aren't shown on here. Next slide. So the whole point of showing this was just to, you know, this mega project is an elephant, right? You know, the old adage, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. That's what we did. We took this entire mega project, we broke it down into 511 projects. And with each of those projects, they were broken down into control accounts, which ultimately had resourcing plans, estimates, etc., put together, and that's how we measured our performance of the program. So as I've already said, we started planning in 2007, 2008, and we started to assess the total scope of the project. We then went through contracting. So we figured out, once we had a scope, we figured out how were we going to break that scope out into manageable contracts. So we selected our contract partners to deliver that scope. We then assigned project managers, so project managers from OPG working with project managers from the vendor, to go through the exercise of determining the cost estimates, the schedule, the risks and contingency, et cetera, of all of the projects, which we then brought together into the release quality estimate, which is that $12.8 billion estimate that we took to our board in 2015. And it forms, once approved, it became the budget for the work that we would undertake. Next slide. I'm going to talk about each of those boxes on that planning process, but probably very briefly for the sake of time. I think this presentation will be made available to you, so you can read all this. And I know Roy Martin's on the phone somewhere, and this is Roy Martin's slide. He'll remember this very well. We started off with about 1,400 scope requests, and what's important to take out of here is that try and get all of your scope on the table and then figure out what's reasonable for you to execute within your project. Recognizing that the more that you take on, the more risk that you will bear. So the trick here is to take on the scope that you need to take on to be successful, and don't take on the scope that is not mandatory for you to do whatever you're intending to do. In our case, there was certain scope that we could restart the unit and run on day one without doing that scope. Yeah, was it good scope and nice to have scope? Absolutely. And it's good to be done at a later date, but we did not need to complicate our project by taking it on. So we developed a pretty robust program scoping strategy. We had a program level scope review board, and we vetted all of the items and landed on the required scope that allowed us to extend the life of the asset, or scope that needed to be done in a dewatered, defueled state. The other stuff, we said if it could get done at another time, we didn't take it on. Again, that was a risk management strategy. Next slide. So when all said and done, we ended up with scope that fit into six buckets of work. Think about the program work breakdown structure. I call these bundles, so 6 bundles of work. The defuel fuel handling bundle, the retube and feeder replacement bundle, turbine generator bundle, steam generator bundle. And by the way, we are not replacing our steam generators. We're only cleaning them and adding access ports. The balance of plant bundle, which was in essence everything else that didn't fit in those 4 bundles. And then there's a bunch of work that we had to do, valve work, etc., that we needed to do maintenance type work that we were going to do while the unit was in our control. Next slide. So OPG made a strategic decision to, I'm jumping right into that bullet here. So again, I said earlier, OPG is ultimately accountable for the delivery of the refurbishment program safely, right? We used, largely use engineer and procure and construct contracting model. What's really important here is that we are the integrator of all of the work that each of these contractors are doing. So at the end of the day, we needed to make sure that the contracts that we had were linked to the scope, and we could integrate it back into our master plan. And that there are different procurement methods and contracting strategies that are available to us. We often had questions asked, well, why aren't you going fixed price models for all the scope of the work? And where we could have a vendor execute a piece of work that they had control to execute, that there wasn't risks that the owner would put on them, it made sense to do fixed price model. And we did that for our tooling as an example. Our tooling vendors, they did that work in their own shop. But when you get into the plant work, where you got a unit 2 in the midst of 3 other operating units with lots of distractions from those operating units, lots of opportunity to create risk, you could go a fixed price model, but the risk premium that was likely in it would be too large to actually accept. And therefore, we went to a target price model, which was a target price was the vendor coming in, detailing out the scope and working with us to understand that scope and agreeing on a price for which they would get a fee, and then we set disincentives and incentives against them coming in under or over that target price. So again, fixed price is great if you can get it, but you got to understand the risk of the work and how it gets done to determine what's the most appropriate contract model to put in place. Next slide, please. With scoping complete, engineering could now be performed. We did that, and then we could get into the cost estimating activity. I'm not going to go through this. You guys have probably had many presentations on cost estimating to date. Just to say here that that we took the time to follow AACE's practices, and we developed. We took projects from through our gated process from Gate 5. As engineering got from class 5 estimates, as engineering got done, progressed into class 4, 3 estimates. Ultimately, RQE, the products were generally class 2 or 3. And from there, we then determined what the contingency requirement was based on that class. The one thing I would say that's important here is, there's the estimating process, the mechanics of doing the calculations and the takeoffs and that. But take the time to document the basis of estimate and focus some time on the exclusions list. How will that work get funded and done? That document will help both the owner and the contractor as time goes on. You get into change control. If you can pull that document up and remind each other what was included, excluded from that work, it will make your life a lot easier as time goes on. Next slide. Again, schedule development, we follow the industry best practices. We ultimately are the owner of the project. What was key for you to take away here is that we don't have a bunch of vendors with their own independent schedules that, and they get to tell us once a month where they are at on their schedule. We set up a multi-tiered approach where our level 2, we called our control and coordination level. Level 3 was each of our vendor schedules. They were to deliver those schedules in a common standard format. We integrated them in with our P6, and we monitored the progress against those schedules in one system. So if a level 3 schedule was running late, we saw it at level 2 and allowed us to challenge back to recover why that schedule was late, and or where we couldn't recover, look forward and understand what impacts that had on later work. So key message here is get that schedule integrated, get it transparent, make it the schedule that your vendors use, the schedule that you as the owner overseeing, make that one schedule. You also probably heard me talk about a little earlier on when I was talking about Unit 3, I talked about the 36-month working schedule. We refer to the working schedule as, you can think about it as the early finish schedule. It's the schedule that if everything goes well per the plan, you execute the job per the plan. We then did a risk analysis, 3-point PERT analysis on all the schedule activities. And we also have a high confidence schedule, which is really the external schedule that we take to our board. So we work internally and drive our vendors to that working schedule, the early finish schedule, but we carry our contingency and a risk against this high confidence schedule. For Unit 3, it works out to be about 2 months of 2 months of schedule contingency that we have between the working schedule and the high confidence schedule. Not float, got that, I said that. Next slide, please. Someone like to say it's float, but it is not. So once we had scope figured out, we had cost estimates, we had schedules developed, we then went through a risk identification assessment. This is probably a fairly obvious slide, but I would say this, that projects, and I've seen this over and over, projects do a great job of identifying risks up front, and they do a great job of talking about what the mitigation strategies would be in order to, and what that residual risk is in order to determine what the contingency amounts are. and then don't do much about it in the execution of the project. What's really important, what I would tell you, the big takeaway for us, is to make sure that once you create that risk register, you spend quite a bit of time assessing how you are doing week over week at the project level, month over month at the program level, how you are doing at managing and mitigating those risks and assessing any new risks that will come in, and tracking your utilization of contingency based on your risk register. We also had a risk register independently reviewed a couple of times by a couple of different folks, and we received some good positive feedback, but we also received some ideas for gaps or things that we could do better. So be open for that. The next slide, Rob. Screen just got big on me here, so give me 1 second here. Rob, I don't know if you did something at your end, but I'm only seeing half the slide now. Oh, there we go. Good.
My bad, sorry.
No problem. I don't know if I was the only one, but so once we had the risks, as I said, we developed our contingency, and we developed our contingency from 3 sources. One, discrete risks, and they were risks that had a probability of occurrence, probability greater than 0% of occurrence, and a consequence if they occurred. We also then developed our schedule risks, which are related to that 3-point analysis that we did on our schedule. And we created contingency for those that were to cover those schedule activities going long, and as well as the hum along costs with your schedule going long. So if your activity goes long, you need contingency for that, but you also need contingency for your project management resources that are also humming along as your project goes long, as well as things such as interest. So we included all of that in our schedule uncertainty analysis. And then we also did an analysis of the cost uncertainty that was remaining related back to the class of estimate that we got to. So if we were at a class 5 on a project, we carried more cost uncertainty than a project that was at a class 2, again, following AACE's methodology. So we spent some time doing that contingency development. In fact, the $12.8 billion estimate, when we took it to RQE, we had $10.4 billion of estimate to complete the job, which included $1.8 billion of contingency. So it wasn't a small amount, but for a mega project, there are lots of risks, and we spent quite a bit of time sorting out, understanding what those risks are, and go through a quantitative risk assessment, a Monte Carlo simulation to understand what was a reasonable contingency to carry. And we went forward with our RQE. Our $12.8 billion estimate is what we refer to as a P90, a 90% probability that it will be less than $12.8 billion when all was said and done. We presented that to the Ontario Energy Board, and we got acceptance of that, and we have funding for that. Once the project's done, we can put that in rate base to recover it over time. Next slide. So based on the planning process we just talked about, I talked about this RQE in November 2015, and the Ministry of Energy announced and endorsed our project in January of 2016. And we got a lot of, I'm not going to go belabor this, we got a lot of positive feedback. The Ontario Energy Board brought in an independent advisor to review our planning, and their comments were very positive on the work that they had done. They said that they had never seen a project that was so well planned and ready for execution. So that was a really, considering it was the OEB's independent expert to conclude that, felt really good for us. We also had the Ontario Auditor General come in, and in her report out, she referred to the work that we had done in planning as good news. We were all waiting in anticipation of her report out, and she was going through all the negative things that the Auditor General naturally finds, and then at the end she finally says, and I have some good news, and it was us. So it was quite a proud moment for the team. I know some of you are on the phone that were involved in this planning, to really the years of effort that we put in to get a great product was fantastic. But it was a great product that gave us a good cost and schedule estimate, but we now needed to go and execute it and make it happen. So that's going to be my shift to the next section, Rob. Next slide. Talk about executing. I don't know if there's any questions yet on the planning part. Okay, I'm going to keep going then.
There's no questions on the chat board, but does anybody have any questions, or should we continue? Keep going, Gary.
Okay, so next slide, please. So as I've already stated here earlier, OPG is the integrator, retains overall responsibility for the project. The project is ours. We own it. If it's successful or if it fails, it's ours in the end. But we have a number of parties. Our role as the owner is to make sure that we are doing the appropriate oversight and that the funds that are being expended by our vendors is being done in a prudent way. We need to make sure that we are supporting our vendors in executing their work. We also have ops and maintenance activities, work control activities that are going on an ongoing basis for some of our maintenance work. So there still is, even though we've got a number of vendors and contracts doing it, we as the owner's role or the general contractor role, whatever you want to call it, we have a lot of in here, and we also have a lot of work that gets integrated into this overall plan. So the key message here is, just because you've contracted it out, you can't leave them alone and then look at them at the end and ask them why they failed. We understand our business and the inner workings of the nuclear plant better than any of our vendors ever will, and I think it's really important to partner with our vendors for success. We often talk about something we referred to as one team here, and the whole concept behind the one team is that we have OPG folks working side by side with vendor folks on the same team. If you looked at them from afar, you wouldn't be able to tell which team that they were on, but they're simply there to deliver and execute the scope of work that they were assigned. And contracts and commercial stuff, that was all dealt with kind of separately and out of the way of the day-to-day work progress. Next slide. And just quickly on here, obviously during execution, all that work we did in planning, we had to integrate it. That formed the basis for what work was getting done on a day-by-day, week-by-week, month-by-month basis. We leveraged P6, EcoSys, and a bunch of integrated databases, Microsoft databases, SharePoint databases, to track and manage risks, opportunities, assumptions, actions, etc. All the day-to-day workings that come out of a mega project like this. The key though here is that whether you're a vendor or OPG, you got your reporting from the same place. It was one single source of the truth. That got you out of the business of spending your first 3 or 4 days at the end of every month deciphering whose data was right. We all bought into a standard process, standard setup, and standard reports. Next slide, please, Rob. We utilized earned value management, and I could probably spend a couple hours one evening talking to you about pros and cons and how we implemented earned value. I would simply say here, and for those that are trying to figure out what earned value is, it's really, I have a plan, I'm spending money, actual cost, and I'm completing that plan or earning that plan, and we measure ratios of earned against plan or earned against actual cost to determine our schedule performance or our cost performance. At the end of the day, what was really important was keeping this process very simple. So I've got on the board here, what are you counting today? And I used to always ask this question quite often to project managers, what are you counting today? And they should know what they're counting today, because if they're not, how are they executing their work appropriately? If I know that I'm supposed to install, if I've got 10 people here today, that's my plan, and I'm supposed to install 3 widgets, and I have 20 people here to install 1 widget, they should know that that's not a successful day. So we try to simplify the language quite a bit. get it down to measurable unit-based deliverables. And that's how we tracked most of our critical path work. And, you know, if it's too difficult to count, it's probably not worth counting. Find a different way of measuring it, right? We really focus in on, we're installing calandria tubes, we're installing feeder tubes. They're very easy to count. I can count them and I can record how many I was supposed to have done, how many I got actually done, and how many people did I have to do that work? Was that within plan? And if so, life's good. If it's not, then you've got a different problem. You don't need to wait for the invoice to come in to realize that you have a problem. You can know that you have a problem the day that the problem is occurring. And we spent a lot of time through Unit 2, and probably we're most successful at the tail end of Unit 2 of getting the project managers to think that way, and it's a foundation for how we're moving forward. Next slide, please. So that's, I'll stop there again. That's just a little bit about some of the oversight on execution. As I said, I'm not going to get into the step-by-step how to install a calandria tube in this, but I'll now shift to, you got
I have a question, Gary.
Go ahead.
I have a question from Deborah. It says, did OPG determine what their reporting and single source of truth would be during their planning stages? And how did they gain buy-in or alignment on what the final reports would be or look like?
Very good question. We thought we had alignment and buy-in, and through the early phases of Unit 2, we realized that in some cases we didn't, and those problems became very apparent when you get to a executive reporting meeting and you have two different versions of where the project is actually at, and that really drove our project controls organizations to work very close together to get to where, you know, I believe is the Shangri-La of project controls, is where you are at that single point of reporting. It wasn't easy. It took a lot of time to create the trust and create the transparency to be able to have that single source of the truth. It's not an easy go. A lot of this came from us developing a partnership with our vendors, and again, really looking for ways to simplify, and ultimately, when you integrate the two project controls of OPG and the vendor, you also have an opportunity to save a few dollars along the way.
Thanks, Gary.
I have a question regarding earned value, because, you know, depending on the contracting strategy, the CPI and SPI for the vendor will be substantially different internally to the vendor than it would for the owner, right? And so how did you get around that with respect to communicating progress from that perspective?
So, you know, most of our execution phase work in the field is done target price. There was a few fixed price, but I understand your point of view that, you know, we would measure and value fixed price contract usually when we get to those milestone points, right? So for a couple of our vendors that were fixed price, where they payment, we actually got back down to unit as well, right? So, you know, we had one vendor that was installing access ports, so we could easily count the number of access ports that were installed or started, and it's not just necessarily installing, it might be cutting out the old, installing the new one, welding it, right? There may be 4 or 5 steps that we put in place, but when you get down to that commodity counting, it became very easy at least to measure where you were in progress space. It's fixed price, you're not going to spend a lot of time worrying about CPI anyway.
Right. So really disconnecting the rules of credit from the traditional accruals and invoicing, and really make it about work performance in the field.
Yeah. You know, the rules of credit and measuring putting progress in a schedule, you can do that. That works, and that works great for a lot of your tasks. But I would really try to get to a commodity-based counting. I think is, you know, it gives you a different view perhaps, but it's nice to have a percentage complete on my P6 plan for all my detailed tasks, and then a rolled up commodity count. Compare the two. If they're telling you different results, then dig into it. But they really should, if you set it up properly, they should tell you, they should correlate quite nicely. Right? And then what I'm trying to get at here is project controls are great at measuring that progress or in value. Try and talk to the field about what SPI is. don't know. But try and talk to them about how many widgets they're supposed to install today and how many they did install. They know all about that. So it's a much different conversation. And, you know, again, being a product controls guy, you know, I love earned value. Shifting over to execution, where you're talking to these folks and talking about, you know, counts, you know, the light came on for me. We're overcomplicating it for the field.
Yeah.
I have a question, Rob, if I may.
Go, Dan. Okay, go ahead.
So then your commodity-based metrics seem to work better when communicating with the field and being able to track through commodity-based. And basically, I have 30 feeders to install today. We got 15. Okay, my next question would be on your risks that you had for Unit 2. So how robust was your register? You don't have to go into great detail, but like, was it, you know, 300 risks that you had for that unit based on Unit 2? And how did you actually make out with your risk side of it? So go ahead.
We had over 500 risks for Unit 2 going into Unit 2. So, and then, you know, not all, they weren't all equal, of course. We spent a lot of time analyzing, scrubbing them, and getting rid of the business as usual risks and separating from the real risks, and, you know, the risks that we wanted to mitigate, the risks that we were just going to accept. You know, in the end, I think what happened is that many of the risks that we were proactive about and focused on mitigation, we did quite well, right? But it's the stuff that we didn't know that burns you every time, right? So, and you do a statistical analysis at the front. That Monte Carlo is all about the probability of outcomes on the risks you know. Some of the uncertainty would deal with the risks that you don't know. So your goal is to do better on the risks that you do know, because you're going to need funds for the risks that you don't even know yet. So in the end, you know, we did pretty good. We landed this job on budget, you know, thanks to some of our contingency management and some of our commercial contracts. But you know, we did pretty good. But there's a lot of risks that we had. Some of them quite material that did not incur, which was good news. But we had other risks that occurred, right? And we tracked all that because that becomes input into Unit 3, 1 and 4. Right? Not that we're going to assume they're all going to recur, but the fact that we know that they're possible now, that we can start to manage them.
Applying those lessons learned, which is the segue into the next section.
Right.
Superb.
Keep going.
There's a question here from
Izaz.
Izaz. Here you go. I couldn't read your name.
Oh,
Izaz,
no worries.
go away.
Hi, Gary. Just wondering if you were interested in earned value in the engineering and procurement phase, and if you have any lessons learned or methodologies you'd like to share.
Yeah, in engineering, we broke out. We actually, I have a slide that maybe if you want, I can share with you guys to share back out to you. But we did break. We set up a standard rules of credit for engineering, which were based on our process-based engineering, our engineering process. So I think going by memory a little bit, but I think we had 10% assigned to preliminary engineering, 90% to detailed engineering, and it was broken out by the major steps, right? So it was, and if you want to get to earned hours, it became, well, how many hours did I have planned for that engineering deliverable as a whole? And then as I earned parts about it, I would relate 10% to, if I had a 1,000-hour package and I got 10% earned, I earned 100 hours of that. Now, how much money did I spend? Right? So that's how we did it for engineering. For procurement, we didn't do very well in procurement with earned value management. It was more about what are the deliverables that we need by what date, and we measured the burn down curves for that. Right, the delivery curves.
Did you get what you wanted when you wanted it?
Right, and we managed it against, you know, there was a need date, and you know, we obviously tried to have all our materials ahead of time, and we did a pretty good job of that with one exception, and that was our feeder program. We were living hand to mouth, unfortunately, for a period of time in the delivery of our feeders for a variety of upfront reasons, right? Well, PPQ configuration reasons, etc.
Okay, Gary, thank you.
Okay.
Let's move on to lessons learned.
The next slide, please. This really just captures the concept that we implement a lesson learned process from Unit 2. As each projects get completed, they ran workshops, they captured the lessons learned. We captured somewhere like 3,500 total lessons learned. Most of them were very technical in detail and very applicable to, the technical details of what to do differently for the installation of emergency heat sink project or fire protection or whatever. What I've done over the next 3 slides is to distill what I would say are the project controls, project management, organizational effectiveness lessons learned. I'm not going to talk about the detailed technical ones whatsoever. And some of these are my opinions. They're my opinions. What I, in putting this together, what I think are some of the 12. I think I got 12 of them here. Key lessons learned. That may ebb and flow or change as time goes on, but they're my opinions. What are the top 12 ones for purposes of sharing with you today? So leave it at that. Next slide. Some of this I have touched on as going through the presentation, and I really don't have a lot of speaking notes to these ones other than tell them as they are here. So right off the bat, insufficient front-end planning is a primary source of failure. We spent a lot of time planning for Unit 2 and ultimately for 3, 1, and 4. We also, while we were planning for Unit 2, executed a number of prerequisite projects where we fast-tracked planning. Fast-track planning is a recipe for a need for more contingency because they are risky. So take the time to plan or plan to fail. As simple as that. Get your engineering done before you finalize your cost and schedule. Without understanding scope and engineering deliverables, you can put an estimate together, but it's not going to be as certain, and with less certainty, you need to carry more contingency or you will be overrun. That's a simple lesson learned there. Next time, spend the time performing detailed cost and schedule risk analysis. We just talked about this in a couple of the questions. So identify all those potential risks and, spend a lot of time doing your probability, develop your mitigation strategies, understand what your residual risk is that you need to carry, and ensure that you go through the exercise of determining the right amount of contingency to carry. And, communicate to your folks that you're doing this statistically. So the expectation is you're going to spend your contingency, right? So make sure that you have enough of it to deal with the risks and uncertainty. And I gave you a way of dividing those risks into 3 categories, which I think are effective on any project. Schedule risks, cost estimation risks based on where you are following the AACE's process, and then those discrete risks that are probable events that may happen. Break it down that way, analyze it in that level of detail. We talk about schedule risks, talk about days, but also talk about the dollars associated with carrying people and workers for those days. The importance of good project management process and controls. I talked a lot about that standardized reporting, one source of the truth. Don't forget about engineering and material delivery tracking. Good question asked there. Important to have controls over those. There's nothing worse than already going to construct and have a bunch of trades folks ready to go and install a feeder and not have the feeder that you need to install available to you to install. So make sure you've got good tracking of your procurement. I spent some time in the presentation. Ensure you have simple to understand performance metrics in place. Us project controls experts love this level of detail and earned value management, but make sure you can have that as well. I'm not suggesting we don't do that, but also make sure you have metrics that are commodity based that make it easy to communicate to the team, right? And as I said, you want to get to a point where I can go and ask a project manager what they're counting today and how many people does the plan say that they should have to do what it is they're counting, and how many people do they actually have. Don't wait for the invoice to come in. Know that. Make sure your people executing the projects know that in advance. We also did a number, and we still keep doing those time and motion studies. We brought the local university here, some students from the university in here to basically watch the workers. And we did this in a collaborative way with the vendors and the workers. And I tell you, the first couple times, a lot of resistance, but eventually the workers got used to, hey, I can use these guys to help me solve a problem that I'm having every day that slows me down, right? So we started to get, the trades started to feed these guys because the reports bubbled up and management did something about it. So we've got a routine going now. Almost every month we have 1 or 2 projects that we go out and do a time and motion study. And it's really about what are the things that are preventing you from getting to work and achieving the production rates that you need to achieve to execute the project on time and on budget. We turned it around. It's not about the worker not achieving. It's about what we need to do to help the worker achieve it. Next slide. Construction oversight is key. Now, I say construction oversight. We call it field construction. We're trying to ban that word oversight because we are trying to promote a partnership with the owner and the vendors here. Early in Unit 2, we had this feeling that some of our vendors felt our construction folks were like police officers. They catch you doing something wrong, make a big stink of it, get a penalty. We've tried to shift them down to getting engaged with the vendors early because the construction oversight, they own our programs for hoisting, FME, housekeeping, confined space, etc. We want those construction folks working with the vendors early to help them understand the expectations that we have to keep them safe and keep the plant safe. There is no question that for Unit 2, we had some FME challenges, and we had to do what we call an Ensure Clean program, which was effective due to the fact that we've got no fuel failures since we restarted Unit 2. But it took some effort to get our FME experts working with our vendors to make sure that those types of programs were done in partnership. It wasn't a wait till we find you doing something wrong and penalize for you. It's all about building a partnership. The next one really carries on this partnership thought even further. Build an integrated, high-performing team capable of executing the project. The owner and your vendors will not have all the staff needed to effectively execute the program. We can't go to the local market and get a qualified nuclear vendor to come in and help us solve our problems. And the other industries on their phone, it might be the same for you as well. We know how to do things well as the owner. Our vendors know how to do certain things well. The more you can develop an integrated one-team approach, the more successful that you will be. Your ability to empower teams to improve results, and I really believe that starting at the trade level, we leverage some lean Kaizen activities between Unit 2 and 3 to bring the trades folks into a room and actually tell us what went well, what didn't go so well, and give us ideas. We've shaved a lot of hours off of our current plans by going through this exercise. And by doing so, we don't have trade guys coming to us and saying, but nobody told us how this was going to actually be done. They've actually now feel that they've been able to give input into how it was that we were going to do the work, and the level of ownership just rises incrementally by doing that. Commit to attracting skilled and knowledgeable people. So this is really all about, these projects are long. One of my colleagues once said that our project is larger than the average Canadian, or longer than the average Canadian marriage. It is a long marriage, and we are going to spend a lot of time together. Some people will last the whole thing, but I think there's very few of those. These projects are intense at times, so you need to make sure you have good succession plans in place. Again, getting back to the point that you just can't go to the corner store and get somebody to come in and do these projects. You got to develop from within, having those great projects in place, making sure that knowledge transfer is a part of your program. I also got to point out that project managers are key to a project centrism approach. I spent a lot of time talking about planning, right, which is generally led by, project manager, integrates teams of people to develop plans to get a team ready to execute. We had in parts of Unit 2 where we had project managers that had great plans, and then the construction organization would come in and do it their own way. That doesn't work because their own way may end up requiring a different resource pool and a different duration than the project manager had planned. So it's important for the project manager to be propped up, to have strength, to bring in the construction organization to collaborate and develop a plan that both parties or all parties can agree is executable. Don't find out that you didn't have that integration collaboration when you're in the midst of execution. It will not be a pretty outcome. Delays and cost impacts as a result of tooling incompatibility and lack of worker training. So we built at Darlington a full-scale reactor mock-up to invest in training, and we did use that mock-up quite extensively to test tooling early on to develop our estimate in that. But as we got to the execution, we got away from, we had one tool that was tested in the mock-up, but copies of that tool that went right into the reactor. And every time we did that, we ran into issues, right? So make sure your tooling goes through the right factory acceptance test. If you have the mock-up, run it through the mock-up before you put it into the reactor. And two, spend more time training. We are investing quite a bit of time into training our workers in that mock-up, more than we did on Unit 2. And we're doing a lot of things to replicate the station environment to the extent that we can in that mock-up, and running full dress rehearsals, so to speak. People wearing, if you're in plastics, you're wearing plastics. If you got RP people there doing the monitoring. You got QC folks, they're there with you doing their QC checks, all in an integrated full dress rehearsal way. For the series that we've done that on, we've been more successful than those that we did not do that. Next slide. Safety is a little bit off of my my project management, project controls rants. Put safety first in everything you do. We early in Unit 2, 2017, I think we had 17 high MRPHs and 13 medical treated events. We started to think more proactively about our safety. We started to actually put a stop sign on our critical path before major evolutions, where we wanted the organization to stop and talk about safety before they actually did the work. Now, the message that I gave to the trades was the leadership wants us to stop work, which obviously, their perspective is we want to drive work at any cost. They want us to stop work and talk about safety for our own benefit. That went a real long way of shifting the nuclear safety culture. And as we've gone from Unit 2, we mapped out all the safety events across all of our Unit 3 schedule, and we built in stand-ups prior to us entering series that had safety events in Unit 2 to talk about those events and make sure that the workers were aware and prepared for them. We built that into our training, like positioning to avoid pinches and things of that nature. It was really so. We are spending a lot of time putting safety first, and we're walking the talk by basically forfeiting critical path at times to put safety first. There's nothing worse than having a safety event. It stops critical path for quite some time when you have, in some cases, dozens of trades trying to get to work. So it's worth planning these stops in and avoiding events for lots of other reasons as well. Quality management. I would say that, as I said earlier, that we were effective in the end by resolving our quality issues, but I would have liked to have resolved some of those quality issues earlier in the process, i.e. make sure that you have good quality surveillance at your vendors when the materials are getting done. There's nothing worse than finding out about that once you've installed them in the field and have to rework them or take them out and put new ones in. When it gets to actually the QC workers in the field, integrate with them with your training so the construction organization understands what's expected of them. They play a very important role in quality. It's not just QC staff there to do checks, that's quality. It's the construction workers executing their work with quality mindset. You are going to have NCRs, non-conformance reports, and other all quality records. Just understand where they are and manage them. The next point is about measure performance on documentation. If you're not managing your NCRs, documentation submittals at the end will be delayed. And for us, our documentation was required to get to AFS, which allowed us to get release of our hold points with the regulator. So one of our hold points was delayed. We had to resequence work because we had some delays in the documentation. So we weren't paying enough attention to the number of NCRs that we had open, and our progress of documentation. Even though everybody told us 10 ways to Sunday that we needed to focus on it, we didn't focus enough on it. So if you're into it, I'd go back and look at that again. Welding, there's a lot of welding on these refurbishment jobs. You're cutting out 960 feeders and you're welding them back together, in some cases in 3 pieces. There's lots of welding. There's lots of welding issues that will challenge you the first time. The environment within the reactor is not the same environment that you're going to have when you did your PPQs or in your training. So really focus in on that, practice early, make sure your tools are robust. Make sure your welding inspection routines are top notch. Your record keeping of those documentations are ready, etc. It's gonna. I can't say this one enough. It's going to take some time to master this one well. Welding is a critical point. And the last of my 12 lessons learned that I pulled out is have your performance independently verified. There was a day where, the auditor's coming. Well, I'm all nervous. The auditor's coming. I love it when the auditors come, or the RCRB comes, or oversight comes, because they're either going to tell you that you're doing good work, or they're going to tell you you have a gap that you can go fix and do something about. And that's really good to be told that there's an area for you to improve your performance on. Then you can go do something about it. It's a fresh set of eyes. There's lots going on. There's lots of things that can be missed. So I think that has been very helpful, and I would welcome it, and don't be discouraged by the amount of oversight that you're going to get. I know it may not always appear that way the day of, or when you're at the exit meeting, but bigger picture, it can be very helpful to the project. That is my 12 lessons learned. I only have 2 more slides, I believe. Rob, if you go to the next one. I just wanted to stop for a moment and comment on the level of cooperation, collaboration, sharing that Bruce and OPG have had over a number of years. A lot of our input into Unit 2 came from Bruce's 2 earlier refurbished units, and we are now working very closely with Bruce every day. We have conversations, we exchange information and reports on a day-to-day basis to help us both get better. Those of the nuclear industry, we win together. And if we can help each other deliver our refurbished units safer, better quality, give them a better second life, that's just fantastic for the nuclear industry as a whole. And it's I can't think of any other industry that we do that with, but it's I just want to take a moment, recognizing that many of you work with Bruce to talk about that. We do issue out a annual collaboration report. The next one for 2020, I believe, is due out late December. So look for that. It talks about the things that we are doing. So last slide. Next slide, please. So I picked this up from the Power magazine recently. I'm not sure if many of you have read it. It's a good opportunity if you haven't to have a look at it. I just say this: the best thing about projects is finishing them. It's a hard haul at times. These mega projects, are tough day in, day out. They're tough. When you step back and look at what we accomplished for Unit 2, we have a lot to be proud of. When we look at some of the plans that we put in place in 2009, we can step back and look at what we've accomplished and be very proud of that. But so as you're executing your projects and dealing with the day-to-day challenges, take a few moments once in a while to step back, look at the bigger picture where you're at, and keep focused on getting to the finish. Because when you're done, reading articles like this and celebrating with your teams, although a little bit differently this year with COVID, is fantastic, right? And it's really why we do projects, is to get done and celebrate that success, and then quickly get on to the next one. That's all I've had to say for today. So I'll stay on it for as long as there are other questions. And if you want to follow the refurbishment project, there's a couple things in here. My contact information is here. If you think of a question tomorrow and want to reach out to me, I'm more than happy to extend and respond.
Gary is awesome. There's one question that was from Safar. Did Darlington engage any sort, we call it ECM, but engineer, construct, and manage type agreements for their construction and procurement and engineering? Did you bundle it that way, or did you keep it separate?
Engineering, construction, management. I think some of our products, we had engineering firms that did engineering products, but our generally speaking, it was vendors that did engineer, procure, construct.
Okay. You did EPC.
Yeah. I can't think of one. There may be one out there that engineering was separate. Some of the earlier products that we did, we probably had engineering done, because fast tracking them, you do engineering and then get somebody procure it. But generally speaking, when we talk about Unit 2, EPC model, some of our balance of plant probably had a little bit of variations of that. Irrespective of the model, I can't emphasize enough, it's not about us and the contractor, it's about how we can work together in a partnership to achieve the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't disagree. So questions, people. Come on, this guy's got a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of experience, so tap into it. He's probably looking for a beer right now, but yeah, ask him some questions.
I have a question, Rob, for him. So Gary, when you were speaking of the engagement and the empowerment of the trades to take ownership of that, and I believe that's a really good key point. So what would you consider the major turning point or milestone, I guess you would call it, when you saw that type of swing, and what would you attribute that swing to get him to swing that way?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I don't know if there is one thing, but I'll maybe try and give you a few things that happened. So we started off Unit 2 probably in more of a traditional way, where the vendor was accountable to do their work and we oversaw them. That's clearly where we started. We then started to recognize that we likely weren't going to be successful. We needed to help them, and we started to lean in. I think as you start to lean in initially, it may not be welcomed, right? It depends how you approach it. I'm there to find out your errors in your ways, and that starts to you may get the negative response on that. And we probably went through that evolution for a period of time. In late, I lose track of my years now, probably mid 2018, we started to get into, actually probably a little bit earlier than that, we started to second some of our people over, right? We actually placed our OPG people into the teams. In some cases, we had them sign NDAs that you are now working for the vendor, and we started to break down some of those challenges. In early 2019, Mike Allen, who is the executive accountable for the execution, and myself, who was his deputy, we in essence took over the job. We basically took the vendors under our control, and we started directing. And it was really about, and the reason why we did that was we didn't feel that there was the strength of the leadership at the level to direct the work and deal with the day-to-day issues that we needed to manage through. And by doing that, we started to break down some of the barriers about us and them, and started to get into how do we be successful. And we've finished Unit 2 kind of in a much more integrated way, and then we've gone back to the more and I would say the middle of the roadway, where the vendors have their leadership. We have people that are integrated. We have integrated teams working together, really getting into understanding the common goals, and really recognizing that we're just in this to be successful together. That's one key thing. I think the other thing that happened with our trades is, as we shifted from Unit 2 to Unit 3, we had the COVID situation. We bridged some of our key trades. We bridged them. We paid for them to stay with us because, one, they had the experience, and two, they're important to us for a successful outcome. And what we asked them to do in that time was to spend time helping us prepare and get better. So all of a sudden, their input was very welcome. And like I said, we went through a number of Kaizen events where We had them talk to us about what worked well or what didn't work well, and what would you do differently. I think that's really helped us to break down barriers. I'm not saying we've perfected it. There are certainly going to be folks out there that are still look at us the owner and run away every time we come, but I think we've done a really good job of creating a much of a partnership of recognition that we're in this together. We're in this to do good. We're in this to complete this job within the budget and schedule that we have. The more people that are on that boat, the better off we'll be.
Excellent. Thanks, Gary. I have one question that's written on the board. What evidence did you look for to confirm the lessons were applied on the project? So you obviously have lessons learned. What do you look for to make sure they're applied?
Yeah, good question. I would say we're still looking. The first area is, as we go through unit over unit, we finished unit 2, and while we're finishing up unit 2, we started planning for unit 3. And I mentioned very briefly, we go through the gated process where each of our project managers come up and present their project plans for the next phase. And we release money from the program down to the projects as the project managers come forward, so that when they come forward with their gates, we validate that they've applied the lessons learned. So we have the lessons learned reports. We validate what they did with them as a construct of their planning reviews. And we look to see, plan over unit, did your plan get shorter, get more cost effective? What were the reasons why? And if not, did we apply the lessons learned, right? Sometimes you're applying lessons learned that actually makes your project longer and more expensive. It's better to plan that way than to get that way due to issues in the field. We did all of that. So our gated process really forced us. We have a lessons learned group that works with all the projects to make sure that they are applying those lessons learned, documenting what they're doing, and bring them to their gates. Now we are into some of our big, we're just finishing up defueling of the reactor. And our next phase is really installing bulkheads. So we've started to talk about, we've been reporting to our executives and our board, what are the lessons learned that we apply for each of these series. And we've put diamonds on our schedule to show when we believe those lessons learned will be validated as being successful, right? So now we're basically telling our executives that not only do we apply them, we're going to come back and tell you at certain points how we did in applying those lessons learned and whether we truly learned, right? Hopefully that answers the question, whoever asked it.
Yeah, it was Kim. I think I like the idea of putting milestones in your schedule to say we should have learned that lesson by now.
and being held to account to our board also helps reinforce.
Yes, just a little bit, yeah. Gary, there's another question from Safar. We one of the things that we're focusing on here at Boost, and obviously is schedule adherence, right? Doing what you said you were going to do when you were going to do it. Did you measure that throughout the refurbishment? Was that one of the metrics?
We do. So we measure. Plan work, actual work orders started, actual work orders, tasks completed from our passport, our P6 schedule, and that. But we also measure SPI week over week, right? So we're measuring adherence to the schedule, but really it comes to, likely if you're at 50% adherence week over week, your SPI is declining, trending down.
Yes. Yeah.
So the two are different views, but are again correlated. We look at both.
So you were measuring that weekly during execution?
Yeah, our work control organization, we run a daily project controls call, PCC call it, work control type, where they look at, I think every Tuesday, they look at the adherence from the prior week. Throughout the week, they're talking about how they're doing with adherence, if it rises up and down. And then we also, Tuesday at an executive level, at roll-up level, project level, we also look at the SPI trends.
Okay. I have a question. There must have been times when in those dark winter months where you thought, especially in the planning phases, was there ever a time when you thought we're not going to get there? And what did you do about that?
The time that I thought that we were going to get there. I don't know if I ever thought we wouldn't get there. I mean, I certainly had days that maybe I didn't think I was going to get through the day.
Yeah, we all have those, Gary.
We certainly had, during planning,
Challenges. That's what I'm asking. Yeah, what were the challenges?
we certainly had challenges. When you think about developing an entire strategy to collect all of the vendors' estimates and schedules and then integrate it for that RQE, we had some, and it took us a while. There was a question earlier about getting that level of integration where you have that one version of the truth. In the planning phase, we had engineering products that were going on, and all of a sudden we get surprised that engineering was late. Even though we thought we had a good integrated schedule, it was clear that we truly didn't have a transparent integrated schedule. So those were tough days and tough. And then we had, some of our projects, we needed to get their class 3 or 2 estimates and their level 3 schedules in order to finalize our RQE submissions. That those schedules came late or came full of errors. We would run quality checks on them, and you get through number cycles of that. So, those were challenges that required us to work through them. In some cases, we had to extend some of our deliverables or back out of getting to class 2 and selling on class 3, and therefore having to carry higher contingency because we weren't ready. End of the day, when we presented up the line, we were transparent as to where we got to, right?
Okay.
I think that's really all you can do. When you get into execution, as I said, you guys have known here, I went from being a product controls VP to working in execution, and then we had some challenges with our lower feeder program, and the product manager had decided that he didn't want to do that anymore, the vendor's product manager, and I ended up becoming the product manager of the lower feeder program overnight, and those were tough days.
Yeah.
Our lower feeder program wasn't as well planned as we would like, and it's a big contribution to our us being later than we had originally planned on our schedule. It took a lot of effort and work to resolve that plan, and the number of, it's not just planning. The feeder program is for the most part off critical path, except lowers are on critical path. We focus very heavily on critical path activities, not as much as off critical path activities, especially when they had lots of float. But for non-critical path activities that have lots of float, watch your float depletion, and
it'll bite you in the arse.
It will bite you in the arse, right? So we ended up eating all the float, really finishing up upper feeders that were supposed to be off critical path while we were doing lower feeders. And a lot of it's due to welding challenges early on and procurement activities early on, and a myriad of other things. But we ended up having to do a lot of work on top of each other while we were doing lower feeders, and it really challenged us. We're much better for it now than we ever were.
Another lessons learned. Yeah.
That's one of the lessons learned. We're on our Unit 3 schedule. Our duration for lower feeders is longer than it was on Unit 2 because we underplanned it on Unit 2.
Okay, thanks, Gary. So somebody Mr. Martin, has put his hand up and has a question. So Roy, over to you.
Oh,
thanks. Hey, Gary, how are you doing?
Hey, good, Roy. Yourself?
I'm doing well. Thanks. Good. I had a question for you because we were talking about risk and lessons learned. You guys have a new challenge on Unit 3, and that's that Unit 1 will be starting up in the middle of it. So how are you looking at that? How are you taking those risks into account?
So we are, good question, Roy. I was actually, I've shifted to doing Unit 1 and 4 planning now. Had a little bit of rest time after Unit 2, helping Bill a little bit on Unit 3, but really focusing on Unit 1 and 4 planning. We have a team that is put in place, and we asked that team to look at all of the elements that could be impacted by us having parallel units. So everything from number of breathing air hoses, number of change rooms, number of parking spots. There's 80 something elements that they looked at, and we are working that list down. I think we're less than 10 that we have left with. So we're starting to understand what are those pinch points and what we're going to do with it. Now, we have right now assumed that by the time we start Unit 1, which is in February 22, COVID will be behind us. We've assumed that for planning purposes. And for lots of reasons, I hope I'm right in saying that. But if we are still dealing with COVID consequences, I'm not certain we'll be able to pull it off, because having 2 units worth of people here at one will, and having social distancing in that, I think will be very, very challenging for us. So right now we've planned, it's a risk for us, but we plan to assume that we don't have it, and we're looking at all the different attributes. We are now into developing the Unit 1 schedule. We got our Rev A done. We're got the same thing for Unit 4. We're layering those on top of each other. We're looking for the resource peaks. We're looking for ways to level that. We're obviously looking at the ops resources and how they go over each unit, how they'll transfer from operations to the refurbishment unit. We're going to have 50% of the plant in refurbishment state. So we're into the deep of it, Roy, and I'd be glad to spend some more time with you and others talking through what we're doing there, because I know you guys are going to be there at some point in the future as well.
Well, in fact, we're doing it on the first unit, so yep. We don't get a free unit where we have just 1 unit going on. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Roy. I have some questions. First one from Alex is, what's the change management structure board set up for Darlington? You must have had changes. How did you go through getting those approved?
Yeah, as I noted earlier, Tracy Leung did a presentation at the Toronto AACE 2 weeks ago on change management. So what we did is we allocated some of our contingency to projects and some of our contingency to the program, and we had a standard change control process form that needed to be used. And I'm assuming we're talking about change control versus change management in terms of, maybe I'll ask that after I answer the question. I'm into it now. Change control, where we gave the project some authority to process change control forms, CCFs we called them, within certain band of authority, as long as they had contingency allocated to them to do so, and anything beyond their authority level, or for things that were new scope related, or where they didn't have contingency for, or related to greater than 3 days on critical path, needed to go to what we call the program change control board, which was chaired by Product Controls and had a couple of decision makers. They would come in and present those change control boards. We'd always push back and look for ways to mitigate, streamline, offset costs or schedule impacts, and ultimately made decisions that way.
Right.
So the decisions were made. Product Controls then did whatever was required in change control space in terms of whether we baseline budgets or schedules or not. Okay.
Hopefully that answered Alex's question. I think we need to reach out to Tracy and get her come and do a virtual session in the new year. So that'd be good.
I'm sure Tracy would do that for you guys. She's Tracy and I work together on a couple of different projects. She's the director of Product Controls strategy and systems in that right now. So
right. Excellent. Well, we'll reach out and get their contact details. So a question from Maggie Hutton, more on the plan or fail to plan. Can you share some more specifics just beyond the lessons learned input on how the project teams can be most effective to build a doable and accurate plan?
I spent quite a bit of time on doing that. The first off is know what your scope is, and if you don't know that, you could before you go. We then went through the contracting strategy. So we brought in our vendors, and we developed a gated process that required a number of details to be provided at different gates along the planning process. So, and it's those gates that really are the time where management can check in on whether or not the project is progressing the plan. So, Rob, that may be a takeaway for us to do, is that gated process, that couple slides. If you're bringing Tracy back, she will be very good to walk you through that details. But it's really about having gates along the way towards execution release of funds, where you do preliminary engineering and a bunch of other deliverables, detailed engineering and a bunch of deliverables, and have checks along the way to make sure that you're achieving that. including estimating deliverables, scheduled deliverables. And before we would go to an execution phase gate, the estimates were always vetted by our estimating team within product controls. The schedules were always vetted for quality from our scheduling team. We ran them through Acumen Fuse, make sure that we had logic ties and that they're integratable into the master schedule.
Right.
So things like that were developed and fleshed out in our gated process. The risk register, the risk folks from the product controls would help the product manager make sure that the risks were appropriate, weren't business as usual type risks, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. It's ironically, I'm the chair of Bruce Bauer's phase gate review panel, so I know exactly what you're looking for. So it's definitely making sure we have that level of scrutiny when the projects get to that particular gate, and that we actually make sure we do the checks and measures that are required.
And now our gated process is highly based on Construction Industry Institute's front-end planning process. If you want to go and Google that one, that's it's very it's a takeoff from that.
Okay, understood.
Yeah, actually,
Maggie,
Gary,
go
sorry, it's Maggie here, and just to further pull the thread on that, do you actually use a project definition rating index or something that supports how far along you are in that progressive elaboration?
You know, I know exactly what that is, and we used it a couple of times early, but Maggie, quite honestly, we never really got a lot of traction with it. You know, I mean, and really, it was all about the conversation, not about the results that you got, whether you were, I think, whatever the score was, 200 or 400, and you know, everybody got excited about the fact that, you know, my PDRI was less than the threshold to go to the next gate. It wasn't about that. It was about the conversation. We tried to put that in place on a couple of occasions. I believe it's probably in our governance generally, but something that we haven't actively done on refurb.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, Gary. I know we had made an attempt at that as well here, and I guess, you know, the root of my question really stems towards: are we involving the right stakeholders in the interactive planning sessions to come up with how do you do the right scope? But as you rightfully start out with, do you have the right scope to start with? So
right, and I think, you know, that gated process, which is important, is that, you know, when you think about the stakeholders, make sure that you're integrating. Obviously, there's an engineering process going side by side with the front-end planning, and those engineering deliverables need to be integrated with the gate. You have comms process, right? Constructability processes, ops and maintenance processes. Integrate them all, right? Because there's nothing worse than thinking from a gated process, the project's ready, and then forgetting to talk to ops, who needs to have permitry put on.
Yeah.
So integrate it all.
Okay.
Good. Thanks, Gary.
I know, Shoshana, you had your hand up, but there's one more question that's on the chat here. So, you mentioned earlier about balance of plant work, right? And did you have anything sneak up on you in whilst execution that you didn't realize was going to sneak up on you, and it made you think, hang on, we didn't consider those balance of plant projects? Do you understand what I mean, Gary?
Yeah, I do, and I can't think of specifically, but there were a couple of projects that snuck up on us. Either, and I'm not certain of a scope basis, or in a couple of cases, the projects snuck up on us because we didn't implement them appropriately and had to go and rework them.
Right.
But I can't think of specifically of a project that did that to us. We did, so while we had the outage, the unit in that 3+ year outage, you know, we have a projects organization that does portfolio projects.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, same as us. Yeah.
We brought some of those in as well, but our rule is that they had to fit within a window, and if they couldn't fit, they got punted in essence.
Right.
We worked it again, and so we had a few of those injected over time. I think once we got into it, I'm not certain that there was anything that really came in. Like I said, we found out inadvertently a couple of cases where we needed to resequence the way we did things.
Right. I think this builds on, you know, one of the things we're finding a little bit is focus on the critical path. You mentioned that earlier, right? Focusing on the critical path, and maybe not focusing on those things that are over here with lots of float, and we slowly add away that float. Was there any of those that got really close to like becoming critical path?
Absolutely. There's probably a few of those, and notwithstanding the feeder one that I already gave examples
Yeah.
of. But there are other ones where you're days away from critical path,
Right.
where you create a new critical path, and that's why it's important to really manage those. Our critical path, other than the lower feeders going longer than we wanted it to, stayed the way the original critical path was planned. Right?
Which is probably through D-tube, V-tube, right?
And the reason why we, one of the OPEX we took from the first couple of Bruce units was that if it wasn't for the retube job going long, balance of plant would have taken over critical path.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We actually limited the number of balance of plant work projects, and we had what we call a 60% line. We tried to execute all of our balance of plants on the left side of the 60% line, so that we didn't have balance of plant work getting close to critical path as we started to wind up the unit. We forced it to be early prior to that 60% line.
Understood. So Shauna, you had a question before I get to one more on the chat here.
Yeah, so Gary, I recall going into RQE that the risk register had a number of opportunities as well as the risks. Yeah. Did you find that the project teams actually got to leverage those opportunities? And did you find that when they did they introduce some new risks?
We probably weren't as good as taking advantage of the opportunities we needed to be. There probably was, Shoshana. We keep talking about opportunities. We're talking about opportunities today. We're trying to continue to make sure that project managers are talking about opportunities. But I tell you, it's probably 20-to-1 ratio risk to opportunities right now on the risk register. But we do put opportunities on that risk register. As we've gone through the Kaizen and that, it's helped us to drive out opportunities. The diamonds that I talk about going to the board, it's helping us flush out those opportunities and hold the ground. If you look at our risk drawdowns right now, you'll see starting contingency, transacted drawdowns, threats, opportunities, remaining what we call quantitative risk assessment to evaluate whether or not we got enough contingency. So opportunities are helping us offset some of the risks. So it's something that it's going to take work to get people to focus in on, right? Yeah. There's also this optics that if I find an opportunity, that just means you're going to reduce my budget, right? Right. So what's the motivation, right? So
no motivation.
It takes a bit of time to you got to work with the folks to get those opportunities flushed out and built in.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Yeah, I have one more question on the chat. I actually have two now, but I'm going to try and cut this short because Gary's got to drive home yet. So, but one of them was you talked about benchmarking and turning actual data from previous work, and I know you learned a lot from what we did on 1 and 2 into better plans for the future. So, can you elaborate a little bit more on how you did that? What was there a process you followed, or how did you capture those lessons learned from like 1 and 2 and other projects and really build them into your planning?
So in the early on in probably 2009, 10, 12, 10 to 12, that time frame, we actually had people assigned to go out and proactively look for mega projects and bring in their lessons learned, right? And that some cases that was interviews, some cases it was public reports that were issued, some cases it was third parties brought in to go and do assessments of how the London Olympics or Heathrow Airport or projects like that were done. So we put people, that was their job, and they reported out those lessons learned, and then we made sure we applied them. As we got into shifting the Unit 2, it shifted away from us looking out to us actually now harnessing the lessons that we were learning from within Unit 2, and that's that same team kind of transitioned over. Shoshana, you might remember we had a gentleman named Joe Reed who led that group, and he would publish out lessons learned reports of different projects, nuclear, non-nuclear, just by focusing in on scouring the news or doing, as I said, get parties going and gather that, and then we documented that. And I tell you, the other thing I would say is that our board, you know, if a project of significance was having trouble, Vogel comes to mind. The falls in Newfoundland. I should know this. I'm from Newfoundland.
Muskrat Falls.
Falls, right?
Yeah.
Those projects are very newsworthy. So they created questions that came down from sometimes from the Ministry of Energy, the province, sometimes from our board, which forced us again. And quite often we would say, oh, yeah, we've already looked at that. Here's our report, and we'll share it with you.
Thanks, Gary. I'm gonna cut it there, and I just want to say thank you. You know, we could have gone on for hours here probably. I think with questions and answers but I really do appreciate your time, Gary, and I'm sure everybody here says thank you. And normally we give you a hat or something, but I'll give you a virtual clap, right? And appreciate you doing what you did. I just want to do one quick thing, which is a screenshot of everybody who's on. So if you have a camera and you're willing to turn your camera on, please do that now, and I'll smile. Don't grimace, and I'll just take a quick screenshot so we can use it for our website. Okay, so 3, 2, 1, smile. Thank you, and I captured it, and that's awesome, and we're good. Excellent. So, Gary, anything you want to close with, sir?
Just thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it. I know I talked quite a bit, probably covered lots of ground. I hope each of you got something out of it. And you know, this is most of us again are in the nuclear industry. We need to continue to learn from each other. So you know, maybe I'll get to do this again in the future. Who knows? So I'll be more than happy to do that, or connect you to others who can be more elegant at delivering the messages than I.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks, Gary. So just to close, I have the slides, and I've asked Gary if it's okay if I can share them. So I will PDF those, and I will post a link to those slides on the marvelous World Wide Web for anybody who attended tonight. So you're going to get a copy of those slides. And secondly, I have recorded tonight's presentation, so I will convert that to a video and put it onto a private link on YouTube for you to be able to watch at your leisure if you wish to recap anything. And as Gary quite rightly said, he's provided his contact information. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer any specific questions you have going forward if you'd like to ask those questions. But again, I'm going to close there, and I really appreciate everybody participating. I think it's freaking awesome that we had like up to in the total we had 38 people at one point on this, and I think that's just a testament to the knowledge that Gary brought. He was definitely a crowd puller for us, and allowed us to bring everybody together and share our collective knowledge. So thank you to Gary. I'm pointing at this screen over here. He probably doesn't even know I'm pointing at him, but I appreciate that, and thank you very much, everybody, and have a really safe time and stay safe. Remember, COVID is out there. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks, Gary. Take care.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Gary. Awesome.
Good night, Mr. Handel.
Good night. Thanks. You did a good job setting that up. That was good.
That was good. Take care. See you tomorrow.
Yeah, see you later. Have a good night, Dominic. Don't worry about your work protection issues.
Rob, you stole my question. My question was, what sleep did you lose out during Unit 2 refurbishment? Kind of like asked a similar question.
There you go.
Anyway.
Take care, Dominic. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.
Hey, Dom.